Hi everyone, it's John. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day and a wonderful week. I think it's been a while since I've actually come to you with an actual long form book review, which when I started this channel I thought was pretty much all I would be posting. I have done a few tags and book hauls in the last couple of months, but I wanted to do some more reviews to sort of get back to my channel's roots. And I read this earlier in the year and wanted to share it. This is by an author everyone knows. I hope everyone knows her. It's Shirley Jackson, and this is the FSG, the Farrar Straus Giroux Classics edition of The Lottery and Other Stories. Shirley Jackson is one of those writers who gets anthologized a lot in collections of short stories, almost always for the 1948 short story that she wrote called The Lottery. But she also wrote dozens of other stories, maybe even more than that, maybe a couple of hundred. I know you could fill several books this size with just her short stories, but she also wrote two really well-known novels called We Have Also Lived in the Castle, and oh goodness, the other one is escaping my mind at the moment. But there are two of her really well-known novels, but she also wrote several novels too. Those are the only two you really hear much about. But I wanted to talk about her short stories. I thought they were actually spectacular, and it's kind of unfortunate that you never really hear about Shirley Jackson getting top billing as one of those great American short story writers on the order of, say, a Faulkner or a John Cheever or people like that, because her stories have a very, sometimes a domestic, sometimes a very underwhelming setting, which might make them not the most gripping action to read, but I think psychologically they are superb. And I just wanted to share a few with you. The review that follows will contain what some people might call spoilers, but considering Shirley Jackson has been dead for well over half a century, these stories have been out there if you wanted to read them. Hopefully most people interested in short stories will have some familiarity with, as I said, The Lottery, which was published in The New Yorker in 1948. In this story, this story is sort of unusual in her body of work because it takes you unusually close to a scapegoating situation. If you're familiar with the story, you know what I'm talking about at the very end, and the ensuing murder of the woman in question. She takes you within an eye's distance, very short distance, of the actual violence. Most of her stories, collected in this volume, and others, I would imagine, tell stories of violence, psychological drama, tension, in a much more understated and differently inflected way. In the few years after the appearance of The Lottery, it became increasingly obvious that Jackson would do her greatest work in the short story form, at least in my opinion. In almost everything in this collection, it's clear that she had learned one of the cornerstones of narrative art. Sometimes what you don't show is even more unsettling than what you do. And at their best, these selections are full of a masterful subtlety that only barely hints at the outre, the unusually out of place, or the downright bizarre. Jackson's fictional worlds are all about making the mundane, the domestic, the quotidian, the ordinary, just so ever so slightly off kilter, in such a way that they make you look twice. They make you wonder about what it is that makes this situation so odd, so off, that it unsettles you so much. Freud actually had a perfect word for it, and I think Flannery O'Connor might have suggested that a lot of her work revolves around the meaning of this German word. Freud called it the Unheimlich. It refers to something that is simultaneously strange yet familiar. It's often translated into English as uncanny. In the short story called Charles, a young boy tells his parents about the exploits of the titular Charles, one of his schoolmates. But upon attending a PTA meeting and speaking to the teacher, the boy's parents learn that there is no one named Charles in the class. So the reader is left wondering, is Charlie, as he's called in the story, is Charlie merely a harmless imaginary friend? Or does he actually see and hear him as another person? Which could hint that, this is much more sinister than just an imaginary friend or situation. Like the great writer that she is, Shirley Jackson never bursts the fictional bubble and tells you. She leaves belief suspended, which has the eerily odd, unsettling effect of leaving you wondering, of not answering that question. The short story The Witch tells of a young boy and his mother on a train ride, and as you would expect for a young boy to do, the boy starts growing antsy and fidgety on the long trip, and he encounters on the train an older gentleman who makes the boy's acquaintance and seemingly tries to put him at ease. He repeatedly tells the boy with a disconcertedly straight face that he killed his own sister. The old man killed his own sister, which leaves the reader asking to themselves, why would you tell this to a young boy on a train? You're trapped with in close quarters for possibly several hours. Would you tell him this to just distract him and give his mother some peace and quiet? Or possibly relieve his own conscience of a horrible crime that he committed? Jackson lets the reader revel in the ambiguity of the possibilities that she's built up for you. Jackson speaks just as eloquently to the crushing smallness of social roles and expectations in stories like Flower Garden, where Mrs. Winning learns that she's getting a new neighbor, Mrs. McLean. Mrs. Winning is jealous of her neighbor's opportunity to have a garden, as her house doesn't get the needed amount of sunlight. The two grow to befriend one another, and one day Mrs. McLean openly offers a black boy in the neighborhood the chance to tend her garden. After which, many in the neighborhood predictably start to turn a cold shoulder to her. Remember, these stories were written largely in the 40s and 50s. There is no sense of the uncanny in this story, but the themes in the story go a long way in showing what a diverse range of tone and timbre Jackson boldly takes on. And they're in more stories than just The Witch. She is more concerned with issues of social justice, even though she doesn't come out and say that or use those words. But she's more interested in the rising cultural themes going into the 50s and the early 60s before her life was cut short. But it's not always about the psychological drama or tension in a seemingly average, ordinary situation. But sometimes the driving force is the what I like to call the crushing smallness of other people. As the stories stack up alongside each other, two things increasingly become clear about Jackson's talent. Her preternatural ability to portray the domestic lives of women and children, and her unusual gift to exquisitely place a particular turn of phrase. Her prose is spare, but never bland or declarative. There's hardly a sentence whose meaning goes unchanged without removing a word or choosing another. While the lives of her characters are often tightly circumscribed and suffocating due to the expected nature of domesticity in the time she was writing, Jackson's style always allows for entire interpretive worlds, whole vistas, without a single word out of place. If you happen to subscribe to Francis Bacon's old bon mot that about categories of books, in which some are meant to be chewed and digested, some to be tasted, and the select few to be carefully savored, I would suggest humbly that this collection presents only the latter, or almost wholly the latter. This is a wonderful, wonderful collection of stories. As I said, there are many more that she wrote. I would say probably 60 to 80% of the stories in here are superb, and the other 20 to 40% are still very good and worth reading. I gave this on Goodreads, for those of you that subscribe to a 5-star system, 5 stars. So I think this was my first 5-star read of 2020. This is Shirley Jackson's The Lottery and Other Stories. And I will see you later next week.